Welcome to the Beyond the Reef podcast, where I talk to experts and researchers in the reef aquarium hobby, discussing a broad range of topics from corals and reef biology to water chemistry and equipment. We take a deep dive into our guests' methods, techniques, and top reef keeping tips. My name is Adam Sutherland, and I am the owner-operator of Frag Garage Corals, based out of British Columbia, Canada. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Reef. Today, I am joined by Dr. Christoph Denk of Oceamo Labs. And if you don't know Oceamo, it is one of the most advanced laboratory tests you can have done on your tank water. It implements ICP-MS and various other processes, and it really gets you a lot of detail on those trace elements. And Christoph was generous enough to send me a couple of their ICPs to try out. So what I did is I actually went over my ICP with him in this conversation, and we got into every single element. We talked about their biological significance, the danger if elevated, some tips about raising them, some things to look out for, some of the dangerous pollutants, things like that. Another thing we dove into pretty deep is element sources and how these elements get into our systems, and also how they get taken out of our systems. So we talked about trace element sinks as well. As per usual, hit that like button, subscribe, share this episode in social media. Please comment in the comments section. All of these things help out. And if you want to make a financial contribution, you can send me a PayPal at beyondthereefpod@gmail.com, or you can subscribe monthly to our Patreon at patreon.com/beyondthereefpodcast. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did with Christoph from Oceamo Labs. Chris from Oceamo, we were talking about the pronunciation, and you were saying that we can say Oceamo or Oceamo. It's kind of up to us, but I like Oceamo, so that's what we're going to say.
Oceamo sounds good, so let's stick with it.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks for making time. I'm sure you're super busy, and you got a lot of stuff going on, so I got you on a Sunday night.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Glad to be on your podcast.
Yeah.
It's already dark outside, but that's fine.
Yeah.
I've got my coffee with me. So.
Yeah, we're in the opposite ends. Yeah, so I guess maybe a good starting point is if you can give me a little background on you and maybe how you started this. It is your company, I guess.
It's my company. Yes. Yeah, I founded it together with my girlfriend like 6 years ago.
Cool.
I'm a chemist. I did a lot of chemistry. Like I studied technical chemistry. I did my PhD. I did my postdoc. I worked as a senior scientist at University of Vienna. And I was an aquarist like all my life. I had like freshwater tanks when I was a kid, and I moved on to saltwater like 15-ish years ago.
Okay.
And I was always fascinated by it. And at some point, we were sending out ICP tests as well, and I had some ideas what we could change or improve. And so at some point we just decided, okay, we're gonna try like combining our hobby and combining our profession.
Yeah.
Like my partner is a chemist as well.
Cool.
And this is how Oceamo was founded. Yeah.
Cool. That's kind of ideal when you can kind of, combine your passion or your hobby into your area of expertise, and, it offers a lot to the hobby for sure.
I mean, it was a big experiment. We didn't know if it would fly. But yeah, I think that the feedback from the community is quite good, and we grew quite a bit like in the last years. I'm really happy in how Oceamo is performing.
Yeah.
And this is why also, I did it part-time for like 2 years to have like, some safety for the family.
Yeah.
But now I'm like full-time into Oceamo and enjoying it a lot.
Yeah, and I guess you kind of are a little bit of a partner with Reef Moonshiners. They use your system as kind of the ICP they recommend.
Exactly. They use our lab test. Andre from Reef Moonshiner, he's also like our hub in the US or in North America. Like they do the sample forwarding, and yeah, I know him for a long time, and he's also a trace element geek, so to speak. Really, really into it, and I think he has great success with his methodology. So it's fantastic for us.
So I guess, are there other products you do sell some other products on top of doing the ICP testing? Is there anything super specific that you'd say you bring to the hobby, like in terms of products that because I don't think I've really looked into the product line much yet.
I mean, super specific. We aim to in developing products, we don't copy anything. We always try to make products that that offer a benefit to the community.
Yeah.
So what we have is like a liquid salt concentrate. It's called Oceamo Corrector, where you can modify your potassium, your calcium, and your alkalinity levels. You have an online calculator, so you could make basically fresh salt water without any alkalinity or without any potassium in it. So if you have elevated levels in your tank, you could, with a 10% water change, you actually lower it by 10%.
Okay.
So you need a lot less water changes compared to like traditional salts.
Yeah.
This is something very unique, and I think we've been one of the first companies to launch like a two-part system, a balanced two-part system on the European market. It's called Duo, and it's also quite used by many people, and they're quite happy about it.
Cool. Yeah.
I'm as well.
Sounds like it goes well with this, people that are doing regular, ICPs and really trying to tweak things.
Yeah, I mean, we are not so much into individual trace element dosing.
Yeah, you kind of leave that to the Moonshiners, I suppose, right?
Yeah, Andre is. I mean, they're not so well known in the European Union. I think he's very well known in North America, and they are very specific. Like each trace is delivered individually, which gives you a lot of control. Of course, we do more of a combined version.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna get into some of the different ways to supply elements, but that'll come along the way here. So I guess I wanted you to kind of distinguish the difference between different types of ICPs that are on the market, because you are ICP-MS, and then I guess the OES is probably one of the more common systems that's out there. Yeah.
I mean, we do both. We started with the OES service, and now we have both running in parallel. We started with the MS like 2.5 years ago because we've seen the limitations of the OES technology, because it's just regarding detection limits. There is, you can't go below 1 ppb, 1 microgram per liter for most elements, and for many the detection limit is even higher. And there is some of the essential, proven essential trace elements out there where the natural concentration is below the detection limit of the ICP-OES, or where even the toxic level might be below the detection limit of the ICP-OES. Yeah. So at some point there was no other way than expanding and getting to the limits of detection. Yeah,
interesting. Because I'm other like OES tests I've done, I do get zeros on a lot of numbers. And that's, some of since doing your tests, like almost all of those parameters at least have something detectable, because you've got, what is it, two more decimal spaces or 3 more decimal spaces of detail?
It depends on the element. Yeah. OES is good for some elements and very poor for others. MS is very good for almost all of them. And like the improvement in sensitivity is up to the factor of 10,000. So for things like cesium, we can detect now like nanograms, and before it's in the upper microgram range. Yeah,
crazy.
So that really makes a difference.
Yeah, really getting detailed. And I mean, something I want to say for people listening that aren't super familiar for ICP is, who would you say, what type of hobbyist is ICP really suited for, and to what frequency? Because I think people that are really into just like taking everything to the next level and really fine-tuning things, they might be wanting to do it every month or two. However, it might be good for the more kind of hands-off hobbyists to still do it once or twice a year.
For sure. I mean, with the MS, we can detect issues before they become apparent in the tank. I mean, the analysis are never a replacement for the aquarist, you sitting in front of your tank and looking at your coral. I mean, you can never replace this. Yeah, you need like your blue thumb that's looking after the coral.
Totally.
But doing ICP is beneficial basically for everyone, even for the beginners, or for people that try to or want to keep like easier corals, like some LPS or maybe softies, and also of course for the hardcore SBS people that want to get the best growth and coloration out of their sticks. Regarding the time frame, I mean, every 2 to 3 months is something I generally recommend. because this is when you adjust trace element dosings and levels. This is when you keep your husbandry more or less constant. This is like a time frame you can work with. Yeah? Doing it just once a year or twice a year, this is just too little. You get too little data points to really adjust things.
Yeah, and
you might be shooting over the top.
Yeah, totally. And some people might only be doing an ICP when their tank's not doing well, but I think it's important to keep in mind to do it when it's doing really well, actually, so you have a reference point of
and it's a bit too late when you actually see the negative response of coral. Then the harm is I mean, it's good to find the issue and to resolve the issue and to bring your tank on the road to recovery, but the harm is actually done at this stage. So the best case scenario is to find the issues before they become apparent and correct them before any harm is done. And it's also very good when you're setting up a new tank, actually before adding the first livestock, to do a test, because there is so much contamination from reef cements, from maybe your used equipment, and many say, okay, I just started this tank and why should I do an analysis? And it's very good at the beginning to give your tank like the best possible start. Or you just start riding with your handbrake.
And I've heard some people start systems with they're like, oh, I'm just going to cycle it with like a cheaper salt mix because it's not going to matter in the beginning. And that's kind of when I think you should actually use the best salt mix.
Exactly.
You don't want to start with the parameters that are closest to natural seawater and kind of go from there, because that should be close to perfect. But I mean, we know that all salt mixes are going to have a little different composition.
For sure.
So actually that gets me to a question that I was going to get to this later, and we'll probably bring it up again, but I was asking you about biggest red flags. So sort of contaminants and dangerous elements that could be elevated or low. What would be a few that you would point out on an ICP where you'd say, like, that's a big problem? Maybe, I don't know, should we get to this when we go through all the elements, or is there anything specific you kind of want to point out?
I mean, there is almost every element can be problematic in some way. Some are more toxic, other are less toxic. Some are crucial, like that you have some present. Other are not so crucial to have them in a certain concentration range. But it's just a matter of concentration. It's the concentration makes the toxin, so to speak. So maybe it's best if we go over the elements to discuss this a bit more in detail.
So I sent in some ICPs at the end of March, and I guess we'll go over my SPS one. Do you have it in front of you, or okay, you got it?
Got it in front of me. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, looks pretty good, like in most parts.
Yeah.
Do you really want to go over every parameter?
I mean, I think not so much for the sake of my own ICP, like I'm, moderately knowledgeable about what everything is, but I think for the fact of sharing, just because we can kind of talk about most of the elements anyways. But I was thinking, let's just start, and if we can skip by some ones if they're kind of no-brainers. But so salinity obviously has a huge factor on your result, right?
Of course, and salinity is very much connected with the main elements, with the macro elements, because it's the macro elements that define salinity. If you have high levels of sodium and chloride, you have like a high salinity. And of course, also calcium and magnesium and all contribute to salinity. What I'd like to point out here is that with salinity, it's a bit difficult with the measurement, because you never measure salinity directly. You always measure like some other value and calculate salinity out of it. Like you measure we, for example, measure conductivity with a conductivity probe.
Okay.
This conductivity is then calculated into a salinity value. Others use a refractometer, use the refractive index. Others use the density by using, like a swimming densiometer or something like this. So all those salinity measurements don't fit 100% together until you have very standardized seawater that has everything in the optimum range or in a defined range. Then all those measurement types fit together, which is seldomly the case. So it's very common to have some differences between different types of salinity measurements.
Yeah, and obviously, like, a higher salinity is going to mean that all of those values relative to the salinity are essentially higher than they really are if you were to bring it down to the correct salinity.
Exactly, because when you bring down salinity, you're diluting everything with your RO water. So everything's going down concentration-wise. That's not relevant for the trace elements, but it's very relevant for the main elements. So the ideal values you're seeing on your report for the main elements, for the macro elements, they are connected to salinity. So if your salinity is higher, also your calcium set point is higher. So that when you dilute it down, you end up at the correct level at 35 PSU salinity.
Yeah. So if someone sent in a test and had, I don't know, I'll say fairly high salinity or fairly low salinity, and they wanted to make adjustments, you would probably recommend that they adjust to 35 PSU first and then make the adjustments. But then you have to kind of do a calculation based on, because the saturation would be higher if it was higher, et cetera, right?
Of course, yeah. I mean, if you are having a low salinity and your calcium is also low and is still, with a green check mark, then it means it's fine. You can use your standard salt. That's usually, 430, 440, 450 calcium. Use that and you will end up in the correct salinity range once you get up to 35. If you're having like low salinity and at the same time high calcium, it's a bit more difficult. It really depends on the individual case. If it's better to let calcium decline first and then raise salinity, or raise salinity and accept the fact that calcium will go up even further.
Yeah, it's a tough call because I mean at that point you could do a very large water change, but then your ICP is going to be less relevant at that point. If you've changed 20 or 25%, then you have to account for the fact that 25% of that water is going to be different. It should be, if it's a good salt mix, it should be very close to perfect. But I mean, we know that none of them are perfect.
That's not really the case. I mean, this is where the product I described before, this corrector, this liquid sea salt concentrate, you could use this to shift salinity without affecting calcium and potassium. So this would be a way how to address such problems. Because you could just lift salinity and not elevate the other parameters. Unfortunately, not available in the US and Canada at the moment, but might change.
But in theory, I do really like that idea for sure. The next one on the list is alkalinity. Mine was actually a little bit lower than I usually keep it on this. It was 7.44, but I kind of shoot for 7.5 to 8. Do you have any kind of sweet spot you kind of feel like salinity or alkalinity is at its best?
Usually I recommend 7.5, but the constancy is even a bit more important than the value itself. I mean, you shouldn't go below 6.7-ish. And some people run the tank at 12 alkalinity and still get very good results.
So that scares me. I don't think I've really seen my tank do much better when it's been past 8.5 personally. So
that's the case for most tanks. I mean, if the nutrient levels are a bit higher, it's usually okay to have a bit of a higher alkalinity as well. But usually the range between 7 and 8 with like minimum fluctuations that makes most reef tanks thrive if like everything else is okay.
Yeah, and every tank has a pretty unique sort of buffer system to it. Depending on how you're supplying your major elements, I think that's probably a factor in how alkalinity can be raised too. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, usually it's the carbonate buffer that contributes to alkalinity. Alkalinity is just a measure on how much acid buffering capacity your tank has, and usually it's carbonate. And there is some influence by boron as well, but it's very little in comparison to carbonate. And what forms of carbonate, it doesn't matter so much what you dose. It depends a lot on the pH value in your tank. Where this, carbonate, hydrogen carbonate, or bicarbonate or carbonate equilibrium, where it is. So this defines like the ratio of those.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm going to get into some serious buffer system discussions with another guest soon, so should be interesting. Okay, calcium. We don't really need to talk about that too much. I think calcium. I mean, I never want to let it get above 450 just for kind of ionic balance sake.
Yeah, but what we've seen above 500, you get really reduced growth.
You get reduced growth.
Yeah. There seems to be some negative feedback at a certain concentration, and this is why we really recommend, if you get above 470 to take measures to really lower it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's also the relationship between calcium and magnesium, and I think strontium. Those are all kind of elements that kind of support each other, right? For that component of the calcification that's happening when the corals grow.
Yeah, I mean, with strontium, it's taking up just like calcium. I mean, those are very, very related in a chemical way, and they are also consumed in a fixed ratio. So when you have your calcium in the optimum range and also your strontium in the optimum range, and supply both like in the correct ratio, then it's very unlikely you would like deplete in strontium.
Okay.
Like yours was a little low, but that's fine. Yeah, I would dose a little bit, but it's not very low.
See, yeah, because I've always wondered, like you say, they're taken up in a specific ratio as a coral grows and precipitates these elements together. I thought at one point maybe that strontium was it's a similar enough element to calcium that it could be used as a building block in place of it. But like you say, if it's in ratio, then there must be a reason for it more than just.
No, I mean, if you elevate your strontium concentration in the tank, there's also more strontium taken up by the coral.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah.
So I never tried how high you could go, how much of the calcium you could actually substitute by strontium, but it's a much larger atom. So this is why that the coral skeleton would get like more distorted when you add a lot of strontium. I mean, there is the discussion if it's needed at all. If just calcium alone would be sufficient, but there is a lot of evolution that was going on with coral, and they've always been exposed to this ratio of calcium and strontium, like in nature. So I think it's quite wise to replicate this ratio in our reef tanks.
Yeah. Okay. Actually, just another question on strontium. Is it an element that you have to be pretty careful with as far as raising? Like, is it a little bit dangerous, or would you say it's one that you can be a little more liberal with?
It's one you can be more liberal with.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really toxic. I mean, I wouldn't go over 12, 15, because then you might get some crystal distortion, like in the skeleton, which might have effects on growth. I don't know if this has been shown scientifically. I mean, we didn't evaluate this specifically, but I just would keep in the 7 to 10 range, and then you are safe for sure.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. What else? So we got boron. We kind of talked about a little bit. It's kind of somewhat related to alkalinity, and it's in fairly low levels comparatively, but it is obviously important for certain functions biologically.
It is. You see boron deficiency in LPS. That's quite interesting. That the fluffiness of LPS quite suffers in a low boron environment. Don't ask me about the mechanism behind of that. But we really see that low boron concentrations are not good for a tank.
Yeah. Okay.
And I've been quite. I was expecting it to be problematic if elevated like above 10 to 12.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, we had some tanks that were like in the 40 to 50 range.
Whoa.
and they had some overdosing issues.
Yeah.
And they were still okay. So there was nothing very, very obviously problematic that could be connected to the boron concentration.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because in the past, I know I put boron in my tank, and not really based on any calculation. It was just, this is like years ago, but I just pour a little bit in sometimes. Like I wasn't really particularly measured about it, but it sounds like it was a safe one to, kind of just eyeball it. But ideally we're not doing
seems
that.
Seems to have worked. Yeah.
Yeah.
you should always take some notes and calculate it.
Yeah,
better be safe.
Yeah. So bromide, one of the halogens. Mine was 72. Ideal value, it says 67.6. So I'm pretty much there.
Yeah, you're almost perfect. We don't see much issues with elevated bromide. You should be careful with ozone, because ozone can transform bromide into bromate, which is like a very powerful oxidizer, which could harm corals, just like ozone itself.
Okay, that's good to know.
Otherwise, usually it's bromide is very seldom too low, because it's an impurity that's very common in magnesium salts, for example. So you're always getting your bromide from somewhere.
Okay, yeah, it has multiple avenues to get in there. So bromide, actually, this is a question on my list, was the kind of relationship between bromide, fluoride, and iodide. Those are kind of the main halogens.
Those are and chloride, of course. It's
chloride,
like yeah.
So that's really the main one. That's the big one. But I mean,
that's the big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you don't mess with this one. Usually with chloride, it's just defined by salinity.
Yes.
No, I know it's a topic that's brought up from time to time, like a balance between the halogens. But from my point of view, I mean, they are chemically related, but they're not biologically related. Yeah. They have like a very, very different function, and so I'm not aiming in having those like in a certain ratio one to each other. I mean, all of them have certain ranges they should be in, and if all of them are in certain ranges, then you automatically set a certain ratio.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there's like iodide is also a very interesting element, because we know that it's beneficial if we dose it, especially if you have a iodine deficient tank and you dose iodine, you really see the health of the tank improves. But it's not really known why this is the case. Yeah. And there's been some speculation that it's redox activity, that it's the reduction or oxidation of other elements that might be necessary to improve bioavailability. But yeah, that's the function or the likely function of iodine, while fluoride is more like deposited in the skeleton of the coral.
Yeah,
like as a calcium fluoride. And the bromide has not so much a known function in coral. It's more of a microalgae, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's something to be said for all of these elements we're talking about. Is there's like a synergetic nature to everything working together, in this proper balance. So, nothing should be ultra low or ultra high at any point.
Of course. Yeah. But I mean, that's the basic to have everything in a certain range, and then there comes the fine tuning and tweaking.
Yeah. Like, what do you think? One thing with the fauna-marine ICPs is they actually do show ratios between some of the values. Is that something you kind of look at much? Like, if say iodine is high in relation to fluoride, for example.
No, not really. We don't see this connection. Also, we don't see that iodine is getting higher when fluoride is low, or vice versa. So no, we are looking more at the individual elements and at their set points and recommended ranges, but not so much about the relation to other elements.
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is just try to get them all into range.
Yeah,
things should be happy.
Sure.
Ratios are nice to see, but yeah.
No, and when you have them in range, you have a certain ratio automatically.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next one was chloride, which we kind of mentioned. I mean, obviously, most of our salt mix is sodium chloride, so there's tons of chloride.
There is tons of chloride. You never need to dose it.
Yeah, but then the other component is, I mean, sulfate is a large number as well. So, for example, like I think of dosing magnesium. There's magnesium chloride, magnesium sulfate. If you had a lower sulfate in your tank, like how important is that, for example, and what would be a good way to get it up? Because mine is a little below the range, is 2583, and it says 2723. So I'm not way down. It's still a check mark, but would there be any benefit to changing that ratio of more sulfate?
I mean, yeah, sulfate is one of the major anions in seawater, so it's really a major component. So we recommend like keeping it in a certain range and not let it decline too much. It declines when using like supply methods that don't dose any sulfate.
Yeah.
And it just goes down over time. And when you're dosing magnesium, just use magnesium sulfate, like Epsom salt in your case, which would dose sulfate, of course, at the same time. When you're having high nitrates, you could use like a sulfur denatration device, which of course also adds sulfate. There is not so much other ways how you could rise it. You could use like sodium sulfate, which brings other problems with it. So magnesium sulfate is the best way.
And I guess it's got to be a really good quality magnesium sulfate. It can't just be something from the drugstore or something. You probably want to try to find some higher grade.
Yeah, I mean, maybe from the drugstore could be pharmaceutical quality, which could actually be good.
Yeah. Sorry, I meant like Walmart or something, more like the cheap, bath salts kind of deal.
The bath salts, No, you need to be careful with magnesium salts in general, the chloride and the sulfate. I mean, those are the main sources of impurity when it comes to dosing products.
Yeah, because big industrial kind of manufacturing of those elements, right? They're so massively used.
Exactly. And even if they're used for pharmaceutical application or for food and feed application, they have rather high allowance levels of certain impurities that could be too much for the reef tank. So even if it reads, food grade magnesium, it could still be too impure to be used on the tank. And for magnesium salts, you add a lot. I mean, when you're raising magnesium,
it's always like kind of like, holy crap, I added so much and it's barely gone up.
You add like a bucket to raise like 20 mix or something. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. Okay, the next one on the list was potassium. Mine was 399. I try to shoot for a little above 400 if I can, but I'm okay with that. I mean, you probably agree potassium's probably one of the more important elements.
It's very important. It's very important. That's one where you really need to be careful with dosing, because rising or raising potassium too fast could really be an issue. Mm-hmm. You could have like negative reactions of coral, other livestocks. Potassium gets toxic if moderately elevated. You could lose fishes.
Really?
You could also. Have you ever used potassium chloride as a dip?
Yes, I do. Yeah. That's my main dip. Yeah.
I mean, this works phenomenal. It kills like everything in a very short time frame.
Yeah, and it's gentle on coral tissue. I mean, that's the important thing. Yeah. But it kills everything else.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is why you really need to be careful with potassium, because it's a potential killer if too high.
Yeah, well, that actually puts a question in my head, because I thought that the potassium chloride dipping, a big part of the reason that it did what it did was because it was like a hypersalinity. Like the salinity is high, but it is actually the potassium kind of being toxic.
Yeah, it's like when you look at nerves, they always nerves work by having a potassium sodium gradient. Mm-hmm. So those elements are really important in nerve function.
Okay.
And when you add a lot of potassium, like just this nerve function doesn't work anymore.
Okay. Interesting.
So this is like for the whole body, from single cellular organisms to animals and humans. It's dangerous for everyone.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So potassium, I mean, what do you think is starting to get to be too low where you should really make an adjustment, like around 370 or something like that?
370 is pretty low for 35.
Yeah.
I mean, 380, 385, this is okay. You won't notice it. Yeah. But don't go lower. Yeah. And don't go above 450.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, any thoughts on people? There's people that have seen good results raising potassium like far above natural seawater, so very slowly over time, and seeing some benefit from it. But I don't want to mess with that. I'd say 450 is
you shouldn't. And I've seen people that that had like moderately elevated potassium and were losing fish because of that.
Yeah. Okay.
And the issue was resolved when the potassium was diluted out.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. Okay, what else we got here? So we went over, well, sodium we don't really need to talk about because that's really just, a no-brainer. Strontium, yeah, my level was 6.6, and it is something I do dose, a couple times a week, and I'm going to just up my dosing on that. Yeah, just based on what I've seen on the last few ICPs. But you said it can go as high as probably 12 or something like that and be fine, or...
Yeah, you won't notice anything negative if you go to the 10 to 12 region, probably also 15. I mean, I wouldn't go higher.
Yeah, okay, yeah, sounds good. Okay, so we're getting into, those are the major elements. We're getting more into the trace here. So
now it gets interesting.
Yeah, so barium is the first one. I guess are these alphabetical? Yeah, it looks like they're alphabetical. So this is in no order of importance. It is purely alphabetical.
No, that's alphabetical. I mean, it might the cesium came to the report later, so that's
Okay.
a bit out of line here. Yeah, but usually alphabetical. Barium is basically like strontium. You don't really know the biological functions of it, but it's like incorporated just as strontium and calcium is, and is of course a disruptor of the skeleton. So too high barium concentrations can be an issue because barium is even way bigger than strontium is. So every barium atom that is incorporated into the carbonate skeleton is like a huge disruptor.
Yeah.
But we have barium in natural seawater, and it's interesting. It's also one of the elements where you can't say really why, but if you are deficient and you dose it, you usually see positive effects.
Okay. Yeah. So the biological function is not fully understood, but we know
it's
better to have it than to not have it. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the range is pretty wide. Yeah, mine was 12.58. So, and it says 10 to 100 micrograms per liter. So there's a pretty good range where it can kind of sit in and still be.
Yeah. I mean, 100 is already pretty high, but that's the level we don't see any issues. And barium is a very widespread contaminant. So many tanks have elevated levels, and we also want to make like a feel-good ICP and not make people freak out about values that are actually not dangerous to your tank.
Yeah.
So we have this green zone, so to speak, up to 100, where we wouldn't expect any issues at all.
Yeah. Okay. Chromium is the next one, and this is one that I seem to go through a lot of, and interestingly, it often is 0 on my previous ICPs, but I actually got a slightly elevated reading on this one.
You have an elevated. This is borderline to jumping from green to yellow here.
Yeah. So 7.2 or 0.72 micrograms. And
0.72, so is 0.2 to 0.5, so you're actually above it, but it's still not a danger level.
Yeah.
So this is why it's still flagged green. Chromium is often brought into the tank by dosing or by reef cement. When cementing your rock work, there's often a lot of chromium in the cement. So this is when you're starting up a tank, it's always good to have this check. Okay, how much chromium is there, and should I do any water changes? Like severe overdosing or like a lot that's coming from the cement causes like sliming, potentially tissue loss.
Okay.
So it has really bad effects on SPS.
But this was an element that I was adding daily because I just started with the Reef Moonshiners calculation. I think it was like, for my system, it was like 0.23 mils a day or something like that.
Okay.
So I was doing that since the last ICP where it was 0, and I ended up with a slightly elevated level. So that just tells me that I should probably dose 0.2 or 0.15 a day, or let it drop and then start again at a lower dose.
You should keep up with the daily dosing. But just reduce the daily amount. And it will, a new equilibrium will form, and it will be lower than your current equilibrium with this dosing. But you see that the differences between the ICP-OES and the ICP-MS analysis, because you said you had it 0 before.
Yeah.
And like the 0 for chromium on the ICP-OES, doesn't really justify a dosing decision. So you get a zero. This means you get a non-detected, which would be the correct way to show such a result.
Yeah.
You are below the limit of detection, but the limit of detection for chromium is not really good on ICP-OES. So when you get it detectable, you might even be like already in the overdosed region.
Okay.
So when you have it non-detected, you shouldn't dose it because of that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And maybe it, like you say, it can be a bit of a dangerous element to add. And if you don't know really what the level is, just don't add it. I mean, like in my case, I may have already had an elevated level and not known it, and then been dosing that daily dose on top of it, to the point of when I sent this test in, and there we go. It's a little bit elevated, but
yeah,
obviously not a problem.
As said, it's not dangerous, no. So you don't need to worry because of that. I mean, cobalt, the next one, is quite interesting because we have the set point even lower than for chromium.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is that there is quite some good publications out there because cobalt is very much associated with mining activities, mining for rare earth elements and so on. There's always a lot of cobalt contamination. So there is the danger of environmental pollution by cobalt.
Yeah.
So it's quite well researched how elevated cobalt is affecting coral reefs and
so this is cobalt that's come out of some of these cobalt mines and gotten into the ocean and has been a problem,
This happens from time to time, when there is some cobalt mines, of course, that there can be pollution and release into the environment.
Yeah.
But cobalt is at the same time an essential trace element. So you need some, but you mustn't have too much of it. And like this area of the area of well-being for cobalt is rather small.
Yeah.
Because in one of these publications, they had their test tank set up with different types of coral, and they elevated cobalt to 0.2, so very low, and still have already seen a reduction of growth by 25% of the coral.
Interesting. Yeah, mine was a little bit above 0.2. It was 0.28. So
you might get 25% more growth.
Really? Okay. So let's let cobalt. Yeah, we'll leave that
decline a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, that was an element I was doing some daily doses on. So just adjust what I was doing.
I mean, it's totally fine to do daily dosing because it's an essential element, and you don't want to be depleted.
Yeah.
But you should always be aware of where your cobalt level is sitting at.
Yeah.
That don't start dosing if you're already overdosed.
Okay. Yeah, and cobalt and chrome, could you kind of give me a little bit of insight on their biological significance? Is it something maybe that is more used to the zooxanthellae, or is the coral going to take those elements in and use them for certain processes itself?
It's probably both.
Yeah.
I mean, not all of this is very well understood. I mean, there is the role of cobalt for some nitrogen fixation is very, very well understood.
Okay.
But this is something that the coral directly doesn't utilize usually. But it's the case with all these transition elements like chromium, like cobalt, like nickel. They're often the active core of some enzymes. And like this enzyme, this biocatalyst just doesn't work with this element in place. So you always need a certain amount that these enzymes can do their function.
Yeah.
And what are the specific tasks these enzymes have? I honestly can't tell you because there is not so much data out there.
Yeah.
But it's those elements where okay, they're essential for life because there is known enzymes that need them. And it would be very unlikely that there is absolutely no enzymatic function within coral or within the zooxanthella that don't use any chromium or cobalt.
Yeah, it makes sense. And kind of what you're saying. It's kind of like how we don't synthesize we need certain vitamins, as humans. Like we
need vitamins
that we can't.
We need
synthesize.
certain amino acids.
Yeah,
and it's the same with trace elements. I mean, also humans need copper and cobalt and chromium.
Yeah, totally. Well, we're all animals here, right? So
yeah, sure.
Okay, so the next one's iron, pretty important one. Mine was right in the middle of the range, 1.58. That is one that often is 0 for me on previous ICPs. So
That's also a tricky one because it precipitates rather fast.
yeah.
So even when you are dosing a lot of iron, it will get down, down very, very quickly because it's usually, precipitating out as carbonate and ends up in your skimmer or whatever. So it's one of the elements where it's really best to dose them on a regular basis, but just dose very low amounts. Okay. So to just ensure bioavailability. And yeah, iron overdosing is not very dangerous.
Yeah.
If you have iron deficiency, you might end up with poor green coloration, not so good growth on your coral. But usually the green is a very good indicator.
Yeah, and if you're overdosing your yellow, I've noticed my yellow corals will get greener, which
green
I
as well.
don't really want.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think
if you like green.
Yeah, iron's probably really important for the health of the zooxanthellae, I would think as well, right? That's probably going to be
it's for
major
photosynthesis, and it's like just an electron transductor. It's redox active. It can transport electrons. So it's very important for photosynthesis. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the power bank of the cell, kind of.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Okay. So iron definitely important. Keep it in that range. Can be a little bit elevated, but try to put some in because, I would say it's. I mean, I don't know for sure, but it seems to be one of the more important metals that we put in our systems.
Yeah, it's really, really difficult to judge the metals into more important and less important. Because
true.
all the essential ones are same level of importance in some way. It's just some of them, you might get away with not dosing them because they're introduced with food and with impurity from your salt and from your products and so on, while others you need to rely on dosing because you don't have these other input functions that deliver them to the tank.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about inputs, trace element inputs once we get through all of this stuff. That'll be good to dive into. Okay, the next one was fluoride, which we already talked about, kind of grouped that in with the other halogens. And then same with iodine. But I'll say my level. So my level on my fluoride was a little lower. I try to keep it around 1 to 1.2. It was 0.95, which is still fine. But
it's still fine. I would aim, dosing a bit more to reach more the 1.2 to 1.4 ratio. Yeah. Like this is the best to keep your fluoride at. But you can't expect any negative effects at 1 ppm.
Okay. Yeah, and safety for raising, I tend to raise it at a much lower rate than the products tell me because I've heard that raising fluoride too fast can damage corals in a way that they seem to not recover from or might just be dormant for years.
That's true. Potassium and fluoride are the elements we dose the slowest, and we go at a maximum of 0.05 milligram per liter per day for fluoride. Yeah. So if you want to dose up 1 ppm, take 20 days for it.
Wow. Yeah. See, because I've gotten completely different feedback on that. I've read that potassium can be raised at 10 ppm per day, and that just seems insane to me.
Some even recommend even higher daily doses or raisings of potassium. There is so much information and different views on things. But if you're not sure if you could go faster or slower, always go the slower route.
I'll have to ask
more safe.
Andre at Moonshiners about this because I was actually really surprised with their recommendation for how fast to raise potassium.
I'm not aware of this. Yeah.
It seemed like a lot in a short amount of time. So I was a little bit skeptical of it, but that's a good one to go over with him for sure. I'll have him on at some point. I'll have to dig into this stuff in fine detail. Okay. So iodine, I was kind of in slightly above the range, but I know it's fine. 73.9, and it's 50 to 70 is the range.
Yeah, if 80 is still okay. Yeah. We've seen tanks with way elevated iodine in the hundreds that didn't suffer from the iodine. So I see it not so critical. It's better to be a bit elevated than to be too low.
Yeah, and I've heard of elevated iodine can brown out or darken out quite a bit if it's highly elevated. probably above the.
If it's high, yeah. If you go in the 200s, 300s, then
that's
this
really
might
high.
happen. Yeah, but it's reversible. So
Yeah,
and it doesn't really cause damage to the coral. It's just maybe a bit darker.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the first things, if somebody asks me for advice on their ICP, one of the first things I look at is iodine, and if it's zero or very, very low, I'm like, that's okay. One of the first things you got to do is adjust that, and then if the potassium is super low, that'd be another. Less looked at element, if we're not talking about major elements. Those, I would say look at those. But so my range was okay here. Iodine just kind of gets into my system from the trace system that I use. I use the fauna traces with my following system, the fauna light basically. And it seems to keep my iodine in that range. So it's nice. It's just like kind of just sits where it should, and I don't have to think about it too much. So
perfect. Yeah. Because many people have issues dialing in iodine because they have, from test to tests, one test they're too low, and the next test they're too high. So some have more trouble getting a stable iodine value. So it's fantastic you're already having it dialed in.
Yeah, well, it's
perfectly.
Funny. Actually, there is another factor, and again, we're going to talk about trace inputs, but I use a KZ flatworm stop, and it has quite a bit of iodine in it. So I think that's probably part of what's giving me a base level of that element as well.
Could be. It's also feeds. When you feed nori or other algae-based products, it's very likely you're also adding some iodine with it.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Cool. Okay, yeah, we got to get into that in a bit. So copper is the next one. Mine was a little bit high, actually. It tends to not be. It's another one that can often be 0 or very low. So it was 3.64. This one I've seen different ranges accepted on different ICPs.
Okay.
So
that's interesting because some of the ICPs have their set points lifted a bit to get it into the detectable range. And for copper, there is also tons of publications out there that like even moderately elevated copper can have like negative effects. This is why we're a bit more conservative on copper.
Yeah, I would say you are because you are 0.2 to 2, right?
True. Yeah.
And the fauna one is 2 to 6, so that's quite a bit more.
I mean, at 6, my alarm bells would ring already because to reach like 6 ppb of copper, you need quite a strong copper source because copper is also one of the elements that is precipitating out rather fast.
Yeah.
So you need to add a lot of copper to get to a constant level of 6. Which would be way too much for my liking. So we can just measure very comfortably in this range between 0.2 and 2 ppb, which is below the limit of detection for the OES technology.
Interesting.
So this is again why you end up with a non-detected for most of the tests usually.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and a high copper value might be indicative of maybe you need to check your wiring. Like there's a few ways copper can get into your system, right?
Yeah, I mean, copper is very high usually in tap water. So if your water purification, if your RO system isn't working properly, you might get copper with your source water.
Yeah.
I think that's reason number one. Usually you see elevated zinc at the same time. Then there is corrosion, especially of wires or cables, the conductors in the cables, it's all copper.
Yeah.
So if the other metals are okay and there is just elevated copper, there is a good chance there is some sea urchin munched onto your cables. I mean this happens quite often. Yeah. And then you have the exposed copper wire. Then you have also electrical current flowing through this exposed copper wire.
Yeah, maybe not enough to feel it, but I tend to feel those things if I have a cut on my finger or something like that.
Yeah. You might not feel it, but the current causes electrolysis.
Yeah.
Electrolysis at the exposed wire, which also might accelerate the dissolution of copper.
Interesting. Okay.
So yeah.
But copper is important for biological functions, right? Like it is still a very important element. So would this be part of and also incorporated into photosynthesis for the zooxanthellae?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean it has two phases. Yeah, it's the essential trace element, and you need it, but it's the element that can cause a lot of trouble if you're elevated.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. Next one is lithium. My level was a little bit high, but I understand that it's not a super huge concern. You have a
No,
different
it's
value range from Fauna on this one too, because yours is one. What is it here?
we have
150 to
50 to
150,
150.
and then they're saying 180 to 350. So that's a wildly
Okay.
different.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, that's widely different. I mean, I think the reason for this is that lithium doesn't have a great deal of an effect.
yeah,
So we don't really see, issues if lithium is deficient,
hmm,
and we don't see issues if lithium is like in the 500s. Yeah,
okay, okay,
we might see issues if we're in the thousands. So you should do something then.
yeah.
But the natural concentration is about 100 of lithium.
Okay. Yeah, and
And
as far as
this is what
biological function, is it a known kind of understood one in terms of that in corals or?
I mean, no, not in coral. I mean, in animals, it can change, nerve function as well because it messes with the sodium.
Mhm.
But that's unlikely the case in seawater. So I wouldn't expect very much of an influence. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for those elements where we don't really know if they're beneficial or not, or if there might be something if we are deficient, we just recommend keeping them around the natural seawater level, because this is you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, totally. That's the proven recipe. But actually that brings a question to me is if you're basing off of natural seawater, like, are you averaging out reefs from around the world and looking at the composition of elements in those waters? Because it's kind of, I mean, a lot of our corals are from Indonesia or Australia, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, for lithium, it's very uniform. It just changes with salinity.
Yeah.
If there is not a lithium mine beside the reef with
Yeah.
the pollutant pipes just going in there, because lithium is an element. It doesn't precipitate. It's very soluble, so it's it had plenty of time to homogenize in all the oceans, so there isn't much variation. And with the other trace elements, I mean, for many of those we're a bit above the natural level regarding the recommended values.
Yeah.
Just to encounter for this closed environment setting, because in nature you have very low levels for some trace elements, but at the same time you have an endless supply.
Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
have the next wave is coming and is replenishing all the
Totally.
water, and you have like your trace element in the original concentration again.
Yeah.
We just don't have this in a closed system, so this is why we like to buffer up some of those to have some a certain reservoir, but
Yeah.
that has a huge safety gap from potentially dangerous concentrations.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That totally makes sense. Okay, so next one is manganese. My level of manganese has been high for like the last 2 years, and it does not
Okay.
appear to be a problem. But mine was
No, it's not.
6. 0.6.
0.6,
0.6,
0.6. Do you do water changes?
Yeah, I do. I know that also the flatworm stop has some manganese in it when it's been ICP'd, so that could
Okay.
be a way that it's getting in. But
Yeah.
it was also my understanding that manganese will precipitate at a certain point anyways. So I mean, there could be a lot getting into my system, and this is just hasn't precipitated. I don't know.
It precipitates quite fast, and it's a very common impurity in salts. Like almost all salt mixes have very high manganese.
Yeah.
And the manganese itself isn't problematic, but what we have seen is that when the manganese precipitates, that it collects other trace elements within the crystal structure and brings them to precipitate as well. So it's like a pull factor for other trace elements.
Yeah,
This is why
I see.
I would recommend like choosing a salt which is low in manganese, not because of the manganese directly, but because of the secondary effects it
Yeah.
might have.
Interesting, because I have changed salts 3 times in the last, I'd say, 2 years, and I think the manganese has always been high. But I'll have to look back. I think it was probably 2 years ago I was on Brightwell, and I'll have to see if I was high in manganese then.
I mean, you should really check the freshly made salt water,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
the tank water, to get a glimpse on the manganese content of the
another
salt.
thing I have been told is that manganese is a decaking agent for a lot of these salts. So
that's not true.
Okay.
It's the iron is a decaking or anti-baking agent.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the iron ferrocyanide, which is like, a more or less harmless compound, which precipitates as well after some time. But the manganese, I know it's often brought up that it's an anti-caking agent as well.
Yeah.
I never found an anti-caking agent that's manganese-based, and I've really been looking for it. So
Yeah.
I'm quite sure it's a contamination that's quite common in sodium chloride and thus ends up in many salts. And so it's wise to choose a salt that has the lowest manganese proportion or concentration.
Yeah. And there's, I'll put in the notes of this. There was someone did an ICP of a whole bunch of the most common salt brands, and that'd be a good one to take a look at. I wish I had it in front of me now, but I was not thinking about that. So biological importance, it does seem like another important metal for, various functions.
It's a bit like iron, like in some way, that it's a very redox active element. There is this, many say that, goniopora, for example, react very positive to additional manganese dosing. I mean, this is nothing we have ever, proven like in a scientific setup, because such things are very difficult to prove at the same time. But manganese is not toxic, so it's a very fine element to experiment with.
Yeah. Okay.
So if your goniopora, alveopora are doing not so good, it's fine to just ramp up your manganese dose and see if you see any improvements.
Yeah. No, it'd be great if anybody in the comments has that experience with manganese, because I've heard that about goniopora too. So if anybody wants to chime in and see if they can confirm, my gonies are doing really well and my manganese is high. So I mean that kind of gives you some information.
with n equals 1 at least.
yeah, for sure. So molybdenum is the next one. Mine has been a little bit elevated too. So 26.8. Your range is 10 to 15. Anything to be concerned about kind of being above in that range?
No, molybdenum is it's not taken up a lot by coral. So molybdenum is an element that's often overdosed, because I think some years back, before like regular ICPing, many people were thinking there is quite a high demand on molybdenum because the concentration is high compared to the other trace elements that appear in seawater. But turns out to be not the case. So we need to dose more like iron and other trace elements compared to molybdenum, despite the concentration being higher. The good thing is it's not toxic. Yeah, you can go up to 100 ppb and don't see any negative effects. Okay. Maybe even higher. This is also an element where we just recommend keeping it in this seawater range 10 to 15. Usually we find 12-ish in the natural open in the natural seawater samples. So that's a fine range to be in.
Okay. Yeah, and it is a metal, right? So it's kind of related to those manganese, iron, kind of doing some function in that range, or would you say there's anything
exactly?
specific?
It can also be like active in enzymes. I think it has also proven activity in photosynthesis, but you have to ask a biologist what's like the exact function of molybdenum. We see positive effects if we dose it, if the tank is really depleted, but that doesn't usually happen if the salt mix you're using is okay and has sufficient molybdenum to start with. You don't need to dose a lot usually.
And like you were saying, I think because I have my trace element input, which is coming from my Balling light system, it's probably just one of those elements that's not getting used as much, and that's kind of why I'm ending up with this residual kind of surplus of it. Yeah. So
I mean, it's an element that's bound at the same time very easily. Like if you're using GFO, for example, then like your molybdenum is stripped. So if you really end up with very high levels, you could very targeted lower it by using some GFO.
Okay, yeah, and we're going to get back to that because we want to talk about trace element sinks at some point. So we'll definitely dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, it's bringing it up all the time,
Yeah,
but it's
that's okay.
it's
We're
a
almost,
huge topic for me. Yeah.
We're getting here because we're not going to all the pollutants. We don't need to get into all of them, so we don't have too many more left here. So
We can have some selected pollutants, maybe. Yeah.
yeah. So nickel is the next one. Seems to be a really important one from my understanding, and mine was kind of right in the middle of the range. So 3.03 in range is 2 to 5 micrograms per liter. So yeah, tell me about nickel.
Yeah, nickel is quite tolerated if elevated. So we have quite some safety there, trending to higher concentrations. Is often introduced via pumps. Some pumps have like some elements that are nickel plated or something.
Oh, okay, like so maybe on the impeller, the shaft of the.
I can't tell you exactly, but there is some pumps that are known to release nickel.
Interesting.
But usually not that much of a problem because we have the safety gap to really high concentrations before it becomes problematic. Yeah. It's also one of the transition elements where you just have these enzymes that need nickel. There is some in the nitrogen metabolism. Mm-hmm. It's, I think, urease that takes urea and metabolizes it to like ammonia to make it like usable nitrogen. I think it's nickel that's used for this enzyme, but there is for sure plenty of other enzymes that use nickel as well.
Yeah,
and it's also one of the elements where you, like with all those essential trace elements, you see growth retardation if they are too low.
Yeah.
It just you might not see tissue necrosis or coral die off, but you just see your alkalinity consumption is going down.
Yeah.
The tank is not thriving as it could. It's if one of those essential trace elements is missing.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like we're saying, not getting your vitamins. It's one of those really important vitamins. Yeah.
Yeah. You won't run a marathon if you're lacking the vitamins.
Yeah. And I think I read that nickel has a role in parasitic, and basically in the coral's immune system, and maybe it's more susceptible to some of these parasites if nickel is super low.
I'm not aware of the publications, so I'm can't really comment on it. I mean, it's the case with all the essential trace elements. If you're super low, like your coral suffers because you just have this this stealth metabolism.
Yeah,
totally. If you have stealth metabolism being because of nickel deficiency or vanadium deficiency or chromium deficiency, you are more susceptible to disease.
Totally.
So if you didn't get enough sleep and just ate only fast food and lacking all the vitamins, you're much more likely getting a cold than when you're super fit and sleep 12 hours every night. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and that's kind of like a thing against I use that I was saying the KZ flatworm stop not for flatworms. It's just it seems to make my corals do better. But I always thought at the end of the day, I think it's just mostly the trace elements that are in there. And at a point in my time in my reefing history, I started using it and I was probably deficient in some of the elements that are in there. And that's why I saw the corals doing better. I don't think it was the sort of weird botanical mixture of whatever's in that. You must know that product, right?
I know the product, but honestly, I don't know what's in there.
Yeah.
We don't really, research a lot of different products.
Yeah, and they're very secretive about what's in their products. So,
there is... there's also a lot of snake oil. There's many products that have an effect that's fairly easy to follow, and you can explain it scientifically. But products where you don't know what's in there and where you don't actually really know what they should be doing, it's a bit hard to judge as a consumer what it does or what it should do or what it might contain.
Yeah, and I think in the modern, reefing world, I mean, it's everybody should be transparent. It's all about us all learning from each other and understanding all the mechanisms of these things. And if you're a company that's secretive, then, not to talk smack about KZ, but I mean, I think they would actually do better if they came out and gave us a little bit more about what's actually in some of these things.
Yeah, but I mean, I totally understand that the company, doesn't giving out like recipes how the products are made, because there's going to be a lot of copycats.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
Totally.
And
it makes sense.
And the research to develop products that are working well are like the foundation of your company, basically. So you can't hand that out. Yeah, but on the other hand, it's you should give like some basic information on what to expect.
Just a little bit more. In some cases, it'd just be nice to know. But okay, so Rubidium was the next one, and this one's a little newer to me. I haven't really seen a test result before. I know that Fauna Marine is doing it on theirs now, but tell me about Rubidium.
Okay. Yeah, Rubidium is like chemically related to lithium and to sodium and to potassium. It's like very, very similar, but bigger. Rubidium wasn't like tested because most of the ICP machines that are out there, like a Triton or ATI or Fauna Marine, they can't measure rubidium. It's quite hard to measure it. And when we started up, we bought an ICP-OES machine like 6 years ago that was able to measure rubidium. Mm-hmm. So we got like the first rubidium measurements for reef tanks and for artificial salts. And we found out that there's, almost every tank had lower rubidium values than natural seawater because it's quite high natural seawater, and we've seen a lot of those deficient tanks. And one of the reasons is nobody could measure it. This means nobody was aware of it, and it's also quite an expensive element. So adding it to sea salt mixtures, the manufacturers don't like to do it.
Yeah, because like 1 or 2 buckets of salt is not much, but then when you're manufacturing massive batches, it's like
sure. It sums up. And it's like 100 micrograms per liter. So there's quite something in there in the salt mixes.
Yeah.
I can't tell you what rubidium does because there is like nothing in literature. There is just, anecdotal reports that people really report positive effects.
Yeah.
I don't have any scientific explanation for it. Like the main effects are on mushrooms.
That's what I've heard.
This is what the Reef Moonshiners do, like those doughboy mushrooms. Andre is growing them like in insane amounts.
Yeah. So they I was hearing that they expand more and they seem generally healthy, but they're growing faster too with the rubidium.
This is what I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, well, mine was right at the bottom of the range, 92.1, and the range is 90 to 150. So there's a pretty good amount of space in there to.
It's also okay if you're a bit above this level. We haven't seen any rubidium-associated toxicity. Mm-hmm. So it's fine if you dose some, but it's usually not consumed. It's there, and once you dosed up, you don't do too many water changes, you're just staying at this level.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is it an element once it reaches saturation, it's pretty good at staying there? Like, is it more kind
exactly.
of like? Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
With rubidium, it's not really taken up by the coral. Yeah. But it seems to have a positive effect just being there. It's the same with potassium. Potassium is also not taken up, but it has the positive. It still needs to be there. It needs to be around. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And it seems to be the same with rubidium.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. And then here's another fine-tuned one is selenium.
Yeah, selenium is quite interesting. It's the reason why we choose to upgrade to ICP-MS. Mm-hmm. Like those 3 years, those 2.5 years ago, because selenium is very bad on ICP-OES. Yeah, you can only measure if it's quite elevated, and it was always very clear that selenium is a very important trace element because it has these antioxidative properties. It even has an amino acid that has a selenium incorporated into the amino acid.
Oh, okay.
And this amino acid with the selenium is incorporated into enzymes. And in like animals, it's associated with, the reduction of oxidative stress. Mm-hmm. And oxidative stress is also something that's happening with, intense light situations that we are encountering.
Which is very much what we're doing with our tanks, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're throwing a lot of energy into our tanks.
Yeah.
And so we started with the ICP-MS to find out that most tanks had rather low selenium levels, and then started dosing it, and also seen very good results based on selenium dosing. And you're seeing now that it's shifting more into the center of awareness, because more and more companies bring out selenium supplements or add selenium to their products. You just need to be very careful to only dose selenium based on those ICP-MS results. You should never dose based on OES and bring it up to the detectable level, because you will be overdosed for sure.
Okay, good to know. And something to raise very slowly, like, is that one to be quite careful with as far as adjusting?
I mean, within this range, if you don't overshoot it, you can dose it quite quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, because mine was below the range. It was 0.154. So your lowest range is 0.2 to 0.5. So maybe I'll bring that up, and I'll try to have it be the only thing I do in a couple of weeks, and I'll tell you if I see any difference. I'll try to have it be the only thing I do.
We can have a follow-up meeting, and you and you tell me your results on selenium dosing. But it's a very classic daily element that when you want to raise it, you don't want to do one correction dose. You want to increase the amount you're dosing every day to just bring up the overall concentration.
Okay. Yeah. Good to know. Okay. So that's one we should probably care about now more than we used to. Vanadium.
For me, it's vanadium, but I'm not
vanadium
a native speaker,
is what I usually say. No, vanadium is what I say. So this is one that's been elevated for me, and I'm pretty sure it's coming from the ceramic frag plugs, or it's just another leftover excess element coming in my trace system. But mine was about 15, and the range you say is 2 to 3. That's different on other ICPs I've seen too, the recommended range. But give me a synopsis on this.
Vanadium is number one source is reef ceramics. So almost, when we see high vanadium, it's most of the cases some ceramic media that's in the tank. It's not very toxic. So you can your 15 is not a real issue. Yeah. But you should monitor it, because you don't want to have it trending up and up and up from every measurement. So this is why it's flagged. Yeah. It's you see quite interesting. I think it's I don't know what's the English term for, is it sea hares maybe? It's like creatures that tend to accumulate vanadium, and they build up vanadium concentrations up to like 15,000 times the natural level. Whoa. Within them, and they need it for metabolism.
You're not talking about like you said. I thought you said sea hares, but that would be more like a mollusk thing. Or are you talking sponges? Are you thinking more like sponges?
No, not sponges. I would just get my translator fired up.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious.
It's sea squirts.
Sea squirts. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Interesting. So they can hold a whole bunch of vanadium.
Yeah, they really, they are a sink, a biological sink of vanadium, and when your sea squirts for some reason, die off, they might cause a huge release of vanadium back into the tank. Okay. Because all the accumulated one is going back. But already this example really shows that it's biologically significant, because there is organisms that really tend to accumulate it.
They seem to really like it. They're just all about it.
They like it. They need it for some reason, and it's also one of the elements that is rather well absorbed by different media and so on. We'll get into that, I know.
Yeah. Crazy. Okay. So obviously, like you say, it can come in ceramics. And I was talking to someone from one of the major farms in the States, and they had problems with vanadium getting quite high, like I think in the 80 to 100 kind of range. And and they did determine that it was in the frag plugs. So, one thing I do with mine is I soak them. I keep an old water change water, and I circulate it with some rock, like almost like it's its own little system. And I just put them all in this big mesh bag, and they sit in there. So I think that
doesn't hurt.
I think a good majority of those impurities that are going to be in the ceramics are probably going to come off within the first week or few days. I mean, I don't know how long they leach out for.
we never investigated it, but it's very expected to have like the highest amount of leaching like in the first days. And it won't be over. It might go for a very long period of time, but the most intense leaching is for sure in the first days.
Yeah. So that's a good note for people that are doing a lot of fragging if you're using ceramic plugs. And I'm sure there's
just
risks
to water
with
it.
aragonite plugs as well. But just soak them like well ahead. Always have some up and comers that are soaking and ready to go.
Yeah, you might also use RO water, so there is no real need to have seawater to soak it.
My thinking with doing the seawater was that I'm actually going to get a biofilm starting to grow on those surfaces too. Yeah. So, but obviously fresh water would be fine too. So yeah, fresh water might actually even help because of the low pH. It might actually help those elements leach out faster. I wonder.
Could be, Could be.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So vanadium, but it's a biologically important element. I can't remember. Is it a metal? Is it in that category?
It's also a metal. It's a transition metal as well. Yeah. And it comes in many different forms. When you look at, it's funny when you look at the vanadium Wikipedia entry, you see a lot of different color test tubes because depending on the oxidation state, vanadium has a different color. It goes from blue to green to orange and like all sorts of colors. Very beautiful element.
Yeah, that's interesting because that makes you think about coral coloration and those stages of oxidization and its function in coral. Like, could it be highly related to color element? Like, it's hard to say, right?
Not really. We didn't see like there's it would be fantastic to say like this element causes your corals get more blue. This element
everybody
causes
wants to hear that.
More yellow and so on. But it's unfortunately it's not so easy. I mean there is potassium and blues, there is some connection, and iron and greens, there is some connection, but there is not, your paintbrush on bottles. It just doesn't work. To get the best coloration out, you need all parameters to be in check. You need the stability, you need the physical parameters in range, you need the biology in range, and then you need to be patient.
And the right light, the right nutrient.
For sure.
To the light. All of that stuff.
All of that stuff.
Okay, we don't have too many more left here. So zinc, obviously super important one. This was low for me. It's one I do have to dose regularly. I was hoping it would be in range. It was a little low, 0.23. Range is 1 to 3. Tell me about zinc.
Zinc is also part of many enzymes, so it's for sure important. Just increase your daily dosage. Zinc is a very typical corrosion indicator. So whenever there is, some magnet is corroding or there is, some issue with your source water, zinc is one of the elements we usually see to get elevated first. Because it's a very common metal, like all the water pipes and all the screws, and there's everywhere some zinc contained, and it dissolves quite easily in seawater. Like the metal when people are mounting a new light bracket or something and drop a screw into the water, it won't be long until you see it on the zinc level.
Okay. And as far as in terms of the coral biology, kind of in the same line as a lot of the metals. Is there anything specific you would say about it?
No, I wouldn't say anything specific. I mean, this is one of the elements that should also be in the detectable range on the ICP-OES test. So if you run low, just dose it.
Mine's often 0. So the fact that I got a reading on your ICP was nice to see because it's almost always 0, even if I do dosing a few times a week. So it gives me a bit of a set point to work from, right? Because now I can up my daily dosing on that one. Okay. This one I thought would be under pollutants, but the next one is tin. Because I mean it can be a really dangerous heavy metal if it's elevated. So, but obviously you put it in the important list. So
it's in the maybe important list. It's not all of them are really proven, but there is some indications in literature that the tin might play a biological role. This is why we have it in there. But the set point is very low, so we are 0.05 to 1 microgram per liter. This is well below the OES detection limit. And we just like to see some tin to if it would play an important role for our zooxanthella, for our reef tank. that we just have some there. Yeah, and usually, tin is an element that's only in very seldom cases it's depleted. Usually you find some in every reef tank.
Yeah. And I mean, I've heard of people dropping a razor blade in their tank and finding it 6 months later and having a wildly high tin reading on their
Okay,
ICP.
that's surprising because I don't think that razor blades contain a lot of tin.
Okay, they seem to me like they would have been tin, but would you say it'd be more zinc or what would be?
Like razor blades, I would, at least the European ones are like steel alloy.
Yeah.
And this is like iron based with some chromium, with some vanadium, maybe with some cobalt, maybe with some nickel.
See, I kind of feel like I just need to put a razor blade in my tank and then I don't need to do any more elements anymore.
It's hard to control.
You could be right.
In there every day for a few seconds.
Yeah. Totally. We got it dialed, guys. But yeah, no, you might be right. I don't know the composition of razor blades, so that could be incorrect. But either way, it's probably not a good idea.
It's more of a contaminant in plastics because there's a lot of plastic additives that contain tin, like anti-fouling agents and stabilizers and stuff like that.
Yeah,
and those tend to be problematic. So tin is more of an issue if you're encountering like elevated levels.
Okay. Yeah, and mine was a little bit elevated. It was 1.9, but that seems to be okay.
But that's fine. That's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay.
But watch the trend because if the next test it's 3 or 4,
if it's 5 with the next test, then you have some situation of active leaching, and you should address it.
Yeah. So,
and this is what I mean by getting those problems early.
Yeah.
You don't want to, recognize your tin concentration when you're already at 10 or 12.
Yeah.
You want to recognize it and add it to your list of things to watch for when it's slightly elevated.
Yeah. And like you were saying, when the tank is new, because, at that point, it's all kind of new PVC. There's new plastics around. Maybe your mixing vessel for your salt is newer. There's all of these possibilities of, some of these impurities getting in.
I mean, there's also the glass of the aquarium. It has a tin side and a non-tin side, and if it's manufactured the wrong way, you have tin from the start. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good to know. Okay. Well, that's another good reason to do your ICP pretty early on. Yeah. Yeah.
To have the best possible start. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cesium is the last one in the main elements here, which I know nothing about.
Yeah, it's the same category as tin. We don't really know if it has any function. It's present in natural seawater. It's related to rubidium. It's like the bigger brother of rubidium. Usually we don't need to dose it because there is some in every reef tank.
I think we only had 0.83 and your range is 0.3 to 3, so I'm in there, Yeah, but is it a metal? I really know, like I say, nothing about it.
Yeah, it's an alkali metal, just as sodium and lithium and potassium.
Okay, alkali metal, totally. Okay, so that does it for the main ones. We'll just go through a couple pollutants because, I mean, some of these we don't need to really, I want to move on to, there's so much more I want to talk to you about, and we're getting in here. So let me know if you're getting tired or low on time or you need another evening coffee.
It's fine. My coffee is empty, but I'm feeling good. So.
Okay, sounds good. Aluminum is probably one we should talk about because it's pretty much always present in everybody's tank.
Yeah, it is, but it's fine. We have, we have 40, like as a set point. You should be below 40, then you don't have to worry about anything. I mean, aluminium is often released by ceramics as well, but it's very common, at least in North America, to have like this artificial, population area for bacteria. Those type of balls and bricks you put into your sump to have bacteria grow on there, and those are often a source of aluminium.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a good thing to look at for people that are having elevated levels. I've also heard it can come in with calc mixes. Kalkwasser can contain if it's not super good purity level.
We haven't seen that, but I mean, aluminium is one of the most common elements in the Earth crust. So basically, aluminium is everywhere. So you will find some contamination in all your salts and in all your belling mixtures and so on and so forth. So there is always some in the tanks, but the really high level sources are like those, those media bricks, and also like if you're using aluminium oxide based phosphate removing agents or silicate removing agents.
Okay. Yeah. And does it have biological function? Like, can it be, like, do you not want it to be zero? Do you want some reading?
No. Usually you have some reading. There is no way you get to zero with aluminium because it's everywhere, but we don't need it. There is no known biological role for it.
Yeah, interesting. Because the more of these elements we look at, we kind of go like, well, I mean, it's there for a reason, right? But maybe there's clearly some that are toxic.
There is some just to be there to be toxic.
Yeah. So out of this big list of the remaining pollutants here, is there anything you would say is something people should really look out for, or anything specific?
What's interesting is the arsenic, because it's a known toxin, and it's often also released by ceramic media. So when vanadium is elevated, there's also some chance that arsenic is elevated because it's often coming from the same source. But it's not a super dangerous element. So your level here with 0.7 is fine.
Okay. Yeah. That's
one of the
really
most toxic elements is cadmium.
Okay.
So this is why we have the set point really low at 0.5. Cadmium can be a contamination in salts, in magnesium salts, and so on.
Okay.
So this is an element where corals react quite quickly.
Okay, that's good to know. And another reason to do these tests, even if you're not moonshining or something, just to check that some of these pollutants aren't accumulating over time.
And also quite interesting is neodymium. Neodymium is the magnets we are using in the tank are usually neodymium magnets, and neodymium isn't toxic by itself, at least like at moderate levels. But it's a very good indication that you have some corroding magnet scenario going on. If we are finding high zinc and at the same time high neodymium, we can say, hey, look at your magnets. They're likely the culprit.
Okay. Yeah, I've never heard of that one before. That's getting detailed. Actually, interesting thing on arsenic is the sealing of my farm, I did it with cedar. And so I have all these cedar boards, like it's really nice looking ceiling. And I heard that cedar in some woods contain arsenic. So I had wondered if over time, because of humidity and whatever going on, I could actually eventually get arsenic into the system. But it's nice to see a reading that's totally safe on my ICP.
That's totally safe. I mean, arsenic was used way back, like in room coloring.
Oh yeah.
This is in paint. This is why there is some rumors that Napoleon maybe was poisoned by arsenic because it gets into the air and it was quite common. So it's a poison with a very long history.
Interesting. It'd be
very interesting to read about arsenic stories.
Deep dive into. Okay. I mean, the last things are sort of we just have nutrients. I mean, my nutrients were actually kind of exactly what I shoot for. My phosphate was 0.1, my nitrate was 9.4. So I'm kind of going for that 100 to 1 kind of ratio. Anything you would sort of say or any disagree?
No, that's fine. I mean, with phosphate, we aim to be a bit below 0.1, so in the 0.07 in this region. But 0.1 is okay. Here, stability is also quite good. How close have we been to your? I guess you measured your own. You did your own measurements when you sent out the ICP?
I often actually do the HANAs on the same day I send the ICP, just so I can reinforce the accuracy. And I got almost the same results on it. So, and I'm pretty specific about how I do my HANA tests, and I think I trust the results. I mean, I'm going to always assume there's a chance that it's 0.01 or 0.02 different than it is. Of course, that's
sure. I mean,
it's just a little $60 plastic.
There's. I mean, even to that's also a misconception about laboratory measurements, because some people think that's like really the absolutely exact number that's given by the lab. That's also not the case, because every measurement, even if it's like a multi-$100,000 lab machine, and even if you do the best practice measurement, you always have a room of error. That's just natural with any type of measurements.
Yeah.
But of course, those home devices have a higher degree of error. But with phosphate, that's one of the parameters that can actually change during shipping.
Okay.
This is why we employ the filters, and you had this vial with the stabilizer fluid that really stabilizes the phosphate value.
Okay.
And so usually we get the feedback that people are measuring at home like the same value that we are measuring in the lab.
Yeah, but that's good reinforcement for the HANA stuff too. Yeah, because I mean, to me that's my go-to for home-based testing. So yeah, cool. But yeah, no, I haven't seen a huge difference in my tanks between, I'd say, 0.07 and 0.1 in terms of coloration or growth or anything like that. So I'd rather see it sitting a little more elevated than starting to drop. So that's kind of my reasoning for shooting for 0.1.
That's true. You never want to bottom out with phosphate.
Yeah.
This can have very huge dramatic effects.
Totally. Yeah. I think it can trigger RTN in some cases.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So just the last thing we'll go over, nitrate. We don't really need to talk about because that's really just the transition of ammonia into nitrate, whatever. I mean, I suppose in a new system you might see a higher nitrate level on an ICP, but most of them are probably going to be lower for established tanks, right?
Not depending very much on the fish load, depending very much on the feeding habits, on the export, on the skimmer. So nitrate, we see everything from barely detectable to 500 and upwards.
Wow. Okay.
So we had cases where the nitrate was a real contributor to salinity because it was just so much.
Oh, crazy. Yeah. Because I would think that a high nitrate level would be indicative that there isn't a lot of good nitrifying bacteria function happening.
I mean, a high nitrate level, if you don't have like this crazy high fish load and you still have this very high nitrate level, you might, like those anoxic zones in your tank, like the porosity of your reef structure, where denitrification can actually take place to revert back the nitrate to elemental nitrogen in the end. And those zones are just needed to make this happen. You need an anoxic environment. This is why I always recommend to have at least some live rock. I'm very old fashioned when it comes to this, to have some live rock in there because it brings this huge variety of different organisms.
So the really different zones, it's these different zones.
And the different zones, you have this porosity from the oxygenated surface to the anoxic center of the rock.
Okay, yeah, because I thought about that because my sump, I do like a cryptic sump with a lot of live rock in it, and sometimes I worry. I'm like, there's some sections of that live rock that aren't getting super thorough flow, like it's going through the chamber and it all passes through there, but maybe there is some benefit to those anoxic zones, as you say, because it's an environment for some different bacteria to kind of.
You should always have some flow to not, get any fouling processes.
I mean, I would say there's not zero flow in some areas, but it's probably very low in some areas for sure.
But should be fine.
Yeah. Anyways, my level was low, so not a concern there. But last one was silicone, and I have had a problem with my silicone going up again. I guess I just haven't changed my DI in enough time. But DI resin is not all created equal. As I'm sure you agree.
That's true, and it's very important when using DI resin to use like a suitable amount, because your water needs some time to get all the silicates bound. So you need like a canister filter that's just big enough to allow the water to have some contact time with the resin. So to work efficiently. But besides the source water, it's granular activated carbon, which is mainly the main source of silicates.
Activated carbon is the source of silicates?
Yeah, it is.
So,
it is.
But that's, okay, so if you're using carbon in your tank, just if you're a person that uses our activated carbon, that might be a way you're adding it to your tank then.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can really see. I mean, this might not be true for all brands of carbon, because there are obviously many out there, and we couldn't test all. But all brands we had in the lab so far were leaching a lot of silicon.
Okay.
And you really often you also see it when you exchange your carbon, that you get some more diatom growth.
Okay.
But diatoms aren't, I see them more as a positive aspect of the flora, as long as they're not really, disturbing, or there is a certain point where they really get annoying, and you should, lower your silicate value.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's they don't do any harm usually.
Yeah. From what I've read and talked to a few people about, it seems like the high silicate levels don't really affect the animals that much, but you may see diatom
exactly
growth.
That's all. And you see even better sponge growth if you have like higher silicon levels. And when it comes to treatment of dinoflagellates, for many of the dinos, it's recommended actually to increase your silicon input by dosing silicon, to just grow those diatoms to outcompete the dinos.
Okay, interesting.
So this might even be a good thing to, at a certain silicon level, we even get to the stage where it points downwards, like it's too low. You should increase your silicon, because it has beneficial effects to have some there.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I'd like to get comments on that if that's worked for anybody. Okay. So that's pretty much my ICP. Wow. This is, we're getting up here for time, but I don't have too many more notes, but I know you and I could probably talk for like another hour at least. So we'll try to condense here. So we wanted to talk about trace element sources and sinks. So sources, I'm going to say, there's bowling systems. Some of these bowling systems incorporate trace. In that way, individual element dosing, like the Moonshiners system, like, Fauna Marine has their element system. Obviously, you're getting trace elements in from fish, coral food. And then calcium reactor is the other thing, right? I mean, calcium reactor is not going to be giving you all the trace elements, because it's really just the skeletons. Water changes is another way. And then there's all the mysterious other snake oil products. But what do you kind of think is the best way to do it in terms of source and supply?
I mean, it's we divide the intentional and the unintentional dosing. With the intentional dosing, where you're actually, actively supplying some trace elements, like with the Reef Moonshiner method, or with your bolling trace mixtures and so on. You're aware you're dosing this trace element, and you're dosing it on a purpose. But there is many aspects of this, unconscious or unaware dosing, where the trace elements, just come as a byproduct, as impurity in your salts or in your feeds or wherever. And this is, it often comes up when there is the discussion about trace element doses, that back in the days, we didn't dose any trace elements, and we just used the halides, and we had, the nicest acropora tank. So all those trace elements, you don't need them. That's actually wrong, because the people weren't, didn't do any conscious dosing, but they did a lot of unconscious dosing. And back in the days, even the purity of the salts and raw materials, because there was no quality control like it is today with ICPs, they just brought in way more trace elements.
Yeah, by accident.
They didn't know, but this is why it worked actually. If you would have everything like super pure and not dose any trace elements, or not add any via feeding and so on, you would run into issues for sure.
I would say though, but back in those days, in my metal halide, no trace element addition days, I'd say the corals I was able to keep thriving and growing were kind of easier SPS. Like, I don't know if I would be able to, get some of the nuanced colors out of some of these, rainbow tenuous type acros and whatnot, looking back, when we compare. I mean, it's always better to do it, to have the knowledge, and based on your knowledge to take informed decisions and see, okay, I'm low on those elements and those might be beneficial, so I'm gonna dose them, and then see what consequences my dosing has, and then can change my husbandry routines and lower doses or increase doses or whatever, depending on the outcome of the analysis, and really make educated decisions. If you don't do it, you might end up
being fine, but you might also have a higher probability of failing because it's going like to the casino a little bit. Yeah,
well, it's something
you
like
don't know.
yeah, like your potassium or your iodine could be just dropping over a period of time, and when it could get to that point when you start losing stuff. So yeah, but exactly, I mean, what is your feeling on water changes, like the regularity of water changes? Looking at, say, the Reef Moonshiner system and how it doesn't really rely on water changes. It's more, you're kind of making a soup and you're trying to maintain that soup as opposed to just changing part of the soup all the time.
I mean, I can tell you more on how we do it because I'm not so. I know Andre for a long time, but I'm not so deep into the Reef Moonshine method. Mm-hmm. But we also tend to not recommend water changes. We only recommend them when there is some reason to do so. Yeah. And the reason can be, some toxin accumulation, some nitrate accumulation. But the main goal is always to fix the issue.
Yeah.
Or get the dosing right, and then you actually don't need the water changes.
Yeah. And in theory, I like that. It's a more efficient way of looking at the hobby, and
it's you have more time to spend looking at the time, and less time you're spending with a bucket and a hose. Nobody really likes water changes. I mean, if you're using a good salt, a water change usually doesn't hurt. But there is many salts that I wouldn't define as very good salts. Mm-hmm. So a water change might, if you have your parameters dialed in perfectly, and then you do a water change with a not so good salt, you might even make your water parameters not better but worse. So you had some work, you spent some money on the salt. You wasted your Sunday afternoon, and you didn't gain any benefits from it.
Yeah. I've done water changes before and actually been, seen some negative results in the system after, and I think sometimes it has to do with the bioavailability of nutrients to my corals. Maybe maybe for me, I just need to do smaller ones if I'm going to do them. But I think it actually really proves something. As a hobbyist, I'm not going to say everybody should try to get away with not doing water changes, but I think that any hobbyist at some point should try to get their system to maintain without having to do water changes, because then you can really understand what's going on in your system, especially if you're doing ICPs along with it.
You have better stability for sure, because every water change is like a bit of a cut.
Bit of a reset.
You have some changes, some drastic changes. Maybe you usually add a lot of manganese. At the time, like fresh salt water is often the 60s to 100s manganese wise.
Wow. Yeah.
This has effects on other trace elements, so you really scramble it around. But maybe going back to the trace element replenishing and sinks. I mean, there is the conception usually is you get an ICP test and you're low in zinc, for example. And many aquarists think, okay, now we are having low zinc. We're just adding like a bit more zinc. We fill it up, so to speak, to 3 or 4 microgram per liter, and then it's fine. But usually when you fill it up, at the next day you're again low.
Is it because of precipitation, or
no?
Is
it's because of many things. We have those input factors of like the conscious and the non-conscious dosing, like all the things we add to the tank, and we have all those export functions: precipitation, the skimmer. We have the media like GFO, where stuff binds to. We have uptake by plankton, by phytoplankton, by algae, by our coral, but the uptake of the coral is only a small part of the cake. Most of the stuff goes somewhere else. So we have like the thing that comes in, and the at the same time what comes out, and the concentration in the tank is just equilibrium between those two things. So when you want to lift your zinc concentration, you can either work towards exporting less zinc and your level will go up, or you could increase your conscious dosing and thus increase your level. But this should be done like on a regular basis and not like once daily. And I think this is very important to understand, that it's not the coral, not our livestock, that is consuming our
Yeah,
trace elements.
yeah.
It's like the rocks, and it's the skimmer, and it's
well,
many
we can
different
move
aspects.
to the sinks section here, because actually there was one more in sources that I didn't list, was the all-in-one like the all for reef type components, which I'm really surprised those work, because it just seems like getting all of those ions to get together in one mixture seems like a hard thing from a chemistry standpoint.
Yeah,
But,
you can never get all ions like in one bottle. Like you can't put fluoride in there. That's just chemically impossible. But you could get most of them in there. But it's depending on your tank. If you're using GFO or non-using GFO, if you're having a macroalgae refugium or not having one, those are really, influential factors regarding your trace element demands. Yeah. So those mixtures might be a good way to set like the basic demands. And then you need to find out what you need to dose in excess to this.
Yeah. And something else I would put in that category is there's some companies that have like a trace element system. So there's like the fauna-marine color elements, the Red Sea 1, 2, 3, 4. I think, Tropic Marine has its A and K. So, to me, those seem like a good way if you just want an easy system to set a base point of your trace element needs. But I think, like we talked about with some of these elements, some of them are going to accumulate more than the others. Like every system is going to be so different in terms of what it uses. So, what do you think of those systems? Like, are you a fan of some of them? Or?
We also have a trace element system that's based on all the metal elements we combined in one solution. But it's with those products, it's very important to not have some overshooting elements. Because if you have, for example, too much molybdenum in there, which is the case for many trace element systems, you will just, to keep all the other trace elements in check, you have a rising molybdenum level, like from ICP to ICP.
Yeah.
So if you're using such a system, you have to be careful to have a well-balanced system. And it's also better to have, to dose lower amounts than to dose too high amounts, because it's easier to add individual elements afterwards if required, than removing some of them specifically.
Yeah, and I think some of these systems, the recommended dose that they tell you to start with is actually pretty, I think, more than what a lot of systems would need. I think it's just a good way to sell the product, but it might be higher than
that's.
I
can't really comment on that. But we, it's also a learning process. We also like refine our mixtures. Also, when new elements, get measurable that weren't measurable before, like selenium. We also found out, it's better to like increase the selenium dosage in our products, because it didn't give sufficient levels for many reef tanks.
Yeah, because you're looking at these tests come in and you're learning all the time. You're essentially collecting this huge database of averages. And when you look at those, actually, I wonder too, if you wanted to look at a whole bunch of ICPs to see a trend, would you put them all at 35 salinity to really understand them? Not always.
Not for the trace elements.
No. Okay.
Because the salinity range is usually between 30 and 40.
Yeah.
And the trace element span, if it's between 0.2 and 2, that's like a huge percentage.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So you'll see the same kinds of trends regardless of the salinity anyways. Yeah. Okay. So that kind of covers our sources. I mean, I think calcium reactors are great, but obviously you're not getting a full range of trace elements. So,
No, some trace elements are not deposited in the skeleton, so they are more like in the organic tissue, exactly. And not all trace elements that are in the skeleton are released back when the skeleton like dissolves in the calcium reactor. So a calcium reactor might be a good way to supplement strontium and calcium and alkalinity, of course, but the other elements usually not so much.
Yeah. Kind of just, again, it's just kind of a good base point for certain things, but it's not going to cover the whole range. Yeah. Okay. So sinks of trace elements. I did really want to talk a little bit more about activated carbon. It sounds like it pulls quite a few things out, and like you were saying, it adds silicates, which I was unaware of. But what other things would activated carbon pull out?
We've seen a very strong effect on copper. But might, of course, also depends on the chemical form of copper, because it might be, bound to different organic molecules. But like all the cases we evaluated, we had quite high impact on copper. It's not so much on iodine, because there's some of the reefing urban legends out there that activated carbon binds a lot of iodine.
I've heard
not
that.
really the case. Yeah,
Okay.
binds some, but not so significant. Yeah, most significant thing about the carbon is really the release of silicates.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I've heard. I mean, I have heard of there's a few elements that activated carbon can bind, but be nice to get a little bit more solid data on that. Based on
we did quite some serious in testing, like zeolites and carbon and GFO and aluminium based media, and we have this all published on our webpage.
Okay.
So maybe you can
Cool.
put the link
We'll
below in the
link to that.
description.
Cool.
It would be fantastic.
So GFO would be another big sink, and I don't touch that
one.
crap, to be honest. But some people have problems with phosphates, and they swear by GFO. So what would you say about that?
I mean, it works incredibly well for phosphate removal, but it was amazing when we did like natural seawater, and with the MS we can detect most of the trace elements and also pollutants. And when we had our column with GFO and we poured the natural seawater through and measured it again, it was basically stripped of everything. It was extremely clean. There was like no vanadium, no chromium, no cobalt. Interestingly, also iron. I mean, it's an iron-based media, but it didn't release any iron. It bound the iron that was still in the water column. So it's a really huge sink on trace elements. And this is an issue when you have a dialed-in tank and you did your regular ICP-MS analysis, and you were fine-tuning all your dosings and you were almost perfect. And then you add the GFO and suddenly everything's completely different. So you can have stability when you don't change your husbandry very much, and you can move to going from monthly measurements to like 3 times a year or something. That's fine if you don't play around with absorbers and so on in between.
Okay, that's good to know. And zeolites are kind of part of that category too, aren't they?
Yes, zeolites are a natural product as well. So they have a lot of different properties, or can also vary. Your zeolites might be a bit different than the zeolites I'm getting here in Austria. But one thing that zeolites usually have in common is they leach a lot of rubidium and they leach a lot of barium.
Okay.
So this is also one of the urban legends of reefing, is that the GFO leaches a lot of barium. We haven't seen that it leaches some, but it's the zeolites that really leach a lot of barium. So usually when a tank presents with high rubidium, high cesium, and high barium, we are very sure it's a zeolite user.
Okay, yeah, I've never used zeolites, but that's definitely a good thing for people to keep in mind. Another sink, I would say, I would really appreciate some clarity on this, is kalkwasser, and if it precipitates other elements along with its precipitation.
I mean, it's kalkwasser. It of course increases the pH locally. So when you drip it into your sump, you have this is the same with sodium carbonate based solutions. You have some precipitation that usually clears up again. So we haven't seen with kalkwasser that you're having that it acts as a huge sink of trace elements. We haven't seen that. What we have seen is that the demand goes up because the overall pH of the tank goes up, and many trace elements just have a higher tendency towards precipitation when the pH is elevated.
Okay.
But you might have the same effect when you are adding some soda lime to your skimmer and increase your pH. You might need to increase your trace element dosing because you might have accelerated growth.
That would make sense.
This will be some factor for increased demand on trace elements, but the bigger factor will be that the higher pH will cause more precipitation. And when it precipitates, it gets skimmed out or settles to the bottom as a sediment, whatever.
Yeah.
Just out of the system.
Well, and then I think the concern is if there was an event that caused a super, super low pH in your system, somewhere out of the ordinary, like like power outage or something like that, where there was insufficient flow, could some of those trace elements like leach out and essentially crash a tank?
If you're having the situation that your pH gets lowered a lot by a longer power outage, I mean the possible release of trace elements that precipitated before will be your least problem.
Yeah.
You got you have this hypoxia because your pumps weren't running, your skimmer wasn't running. Like those are the factors that really, kill your tank and kill your fish.
I mean, I was assuming, most people are going to have at least a battery backup for flow to keep flow running, but it's hard. You're never going to have everything fully backed up where it's like, unless you have a huge high budget system with a massive generator. But, if your pH was usually your range was say, like, let's say 8.1 to 8.4, and then one day it was 7.7 or something like that. At what point would you really see a problem? No. Okay.
No. This I wouldn't expect any huge spikes in trace elements.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. My next one was protein skimming. So how much of our trace elements is coming out in our protein skim it? Because I would think a fair bit. Yeah,
that's actually the case. Yeah, we started investigating this a bit in detail. We do like a skim quant analysis. This is what we call it, where people collect skimmate and send us like the skimmate.
Yeah, fun.
And it's fun. It's fun when we open it up. It's, No, but it's very interesting because the skimmer is like sort of a memory of the reef tank.
Mm-hmm.
So when, for example, with copper, I told you that with copper, you need to have you need to put a lot into the tank to really get elevated levels. Yeah. In the case of a wire that has some leaching, there might not be like a constant leaching of copper. There might be more like a pulsed form of copper release, because there is some pressure build up and then there's bloop, there is some copper coming out. You have some effects to the coral, then the copper is precipitating again, might be back to normal until the next pulse is coming. So it might really depend on the time of sampling of your regular ICP test if you catch the pulse or not. But the skimmer, like when it precipitates out, like a good portion ends up in the skimmate. So when we see in the skimmate like elevated copper levels, they're very good indication that there's something going on and you have some exposed wires or something.
Like I don't skim super wet. Like my skimmer barely does anything, to be honest. I kind of like, my nutrients are in the range I want, and I just kind of, I think I want a lot of that stuff to stay in the tank. But, in some cases, maybe it's all kind of relative to what your consumption is in your tank and whatnot. But, I've heard of people actually putting some skimmit back into the system in lower nutrient systems. But that sounds a little scary to me if it is super high concentration.
To me as well. This is just it's like going to the casino again. It's you don't know what's in there. You could have some organic decay products. It obviously doesn't smell very good, so I wouldn't add it to a reef tank.
Okay.
I mean it happens from time to time when you have some overflowing skimmer. Usually that the tank it doesn't hurt the tank usually.
And it gets skimmed out incredibly fast, I find. More than you would expect.
That's true. No, but iron, for example, is one of the elements you find a lot in the skimmate. You find copper, you find some chromium, you find almost every trace element. So you have an accumulation in the skimmate of almost everything. Okay. Good to keep in mind. So people over skimming might see a little more consumption of some of these trace elements. And it's not just how you set the skimmer, but about the other husbandry practices. If you're carbon dosing, for example, you just have more bacterioplankton that's around. This is the way how it also works to reduce nutrients. This bacterioplankton also is taking up trace elements and is skimmed out afterwards. And so this is, you always have, it's not the skimmer that's directly affecting the trace elements. It's either precipitation and then skimming, or taken up by some planktonic forms that get skimmed out afterwards.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Okay, algae scrubbers would be another pretty major sink. And you know, I would also say that macroalgae is kind of competing with your zooxanthellae, so they might want some of the same trace elements in the first place.
For sure.
But yeah, what are some of the trends you kind of see with systems that run, say, Chaeto or you know, some sort of
I mean, if you want a good algae growth, yeah, to really export nutrients, you need to dose additional manganese and iron, because those are really taken up by the algae and are required for growth. Regarding other elements, I mean, there's not so many trends. I think there's other factors that are like GFO would be a much bigger factor than having a refugium running. But it's always a fun experiment to, you know, sample the water that goes into the refugium and sample the water that comes out of it. There's a lot of what you can learn from this. Yeah. But to have like a less of a competition scenario, it's always good to have like this inverse lighted refugium that is, you know, lit at night while your tank is at the dark. So you have the better effect on pH as well, on pH stabilization.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the benefits. I've never really been big on macroalgae, or, you know, that's never been really part of my protocol, but it seems to work for some people. And if it works for you, then obviously just, you know, dose your elements relative to that.
Exactly. There is many ways how you can, you know, successfully have a nice reef tank. Yeah. So there is not one protocol you can follow. Some people just do water changes and don't dose trace elements and also have fantastic results.
Yeah, it's true. Totally. Okay, so that's kind of the sources and sinks. Okay, I won't keep you too much longer here if you need to go.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I got a few more questions. So
yeah, sure.
One thing I wanted to talk about was what would you say is the main source of trace element delivery to a coral? Like, is it like, obviously we know the corals are consuming the zooxanthellae, which consume trace elements, so that's one way. But are corals also just taking it in through their polyp and kind of on their tissue and microbiome? Can you kind of explain or elaborate on that?
That's really hard to evaluate. I mean, we can measure we can measure how much trace elements are in the food, in coral food, for example, but we cannot measure how much of these trace elements from the food are actually utilized and taken up by the coral, and how much is just, you know, expelled in unused form. So it's really, you know, I don't want to say anything where there is just no really solid data basis to it. Yeah, so it's really hard. I mean, because we can't really judge and evaluate this uptake by particulate food to the coral.
Yeah,
that's the reason why we want those detectable ICP-MS detectable trace elements there, because, you know, we don't rely on the food. We know we have some there, and those are essential, and we have them in a biologically available form. Yeah, even if they're used by the coral itself or by the zooxanthellae. Yeah. That doesn't really matter in this case. But with feeding, it's very hard. You would need to have like a radio tracer experiment to have, like, you know, the trace elements radioactively labeled, and then you could specifically follow up if you have the radioactive food, and you see how much of the radioactivity ends up in the coral and in which form. But like those type of experiments, you know, are really lengthy and really expensive.
Yeah. Nobody's really going to throw that at a hobby like this necessarily. But if it has some relevance to understanding corals in the ocean, I guess, you know, it could be something that hopefully someone
and I think there is some connection between, I mean, our glass boxes at home and the ocean out there. I guess there is quite some things we learned, and that's also, you know, it's also a feedback to coral farming and coral reef restoration projects and so on. So it's not too far off, but I'm not really aware of any, you know, really scientific work that has shown the uptake of trace elements.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because, I mean, some of the theories are that more of these trace elements are consumed along with bacteria, and not necessarily, I mean, in terms of, say, SPS, less of the particulate foods we're feeding and maybe more of the bacteria that kind of goes along with it is kind of infused with those trace elements. But I don't know.
Hard to judge.
Yeah. But it's something we can chat about some other time if you ever get any more info on
more
it.
information. If there is more data published. I mean, I'm screening the literature quite often.
Yeah, cool.
But there is I mean, there is a lot of work being done, so it's always an interesting read.
Yeah. Totally.
But there is for sure a lot of, I mean, also with the coral microbiome. I mean, it's a very recent technique with the next generation sequencing to really get hold of the whole microbiome of the coral and how coral disease and the microbiome are interacting. And I mean, this also got away able for the reefing community, but it's still a very a dark room where somebody is turning on the first flashlight and starts exploring a bit. But there is so much more to learn and so much more lessons to take home.
Yeah, I'd really like to. I've been talking about getting Eli from Aquabiomics on at some point, so these would be some good questions for him.
Fantastic scientist. He has a good publication history in coral microbiome, so might be interesting.
Totally. I got a big list of questions for him. Okay, I'm just going to check my list here because I think I'm pretty close to being done here. There was one thing actually you had mentioned was you were talking about approximating values of some of these trace elements on ICP because it doesn't actually test for all of them. So some of them are a calculation somehow. Am I understanding that correctly?
No, we're really measuring everything, but it's not the ICP machine that's measuring it. It's like the alkalinity is like a different laboratory technique, and nitrate and fluoride. This is done by ion chromatography. So this is often it comes up in forums and so on. So hey, those guys, they are just using test kits because the ICP machine can't measure it. No, it's not the case. We're not using any test kits, but we're using like other scientific methodologies.
Okay, this is different machines. This is why it's not all just one machine, one-stop shop.
No, it's like 5 or 6 different techniques we're using on each sample, and this is why I don't like to have it called like ICP test. Like to have it more called like a laboratory test. Because it's so many different aspects. And another thing I'd really like to point out is like this was like at the beginning of our conversation where we discussed like the difference between ICP-OES and ICP-MS. And what I really like to point out is that the machine is just setting the limit. You can never be better than the machine can possibly be. But if you come close to the limits or to the power of the machine depends on many factors, like how you prepare your samples, how you handle your samples, how clean your laboratory is, how your methods are set up. This is just something one needs to be aware that ICP-MS is not ICP-MS. This is really depends on how it is conducted. And I think this ICP-MS will be the technique of the future because it offers a lot of benefits, but it's way more difficult to get reliable data on because of this high sensitivity. There's just way more that can go wrong.
Yeah, so keep your lab super clean.
For example, we have like a positive pressure of filtered air. So when we enter the lab, like the door is going up by itself because of the overpressure. This is just to keep dust out, for example. And you just need this super clean environment to get like this low detection limits. Otherwise, your contamination would be higher than the concentration you want to measure. And you can have the best machine and still not deliver good data.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, really great stuff you're doing. I mean, I appreciate it. I'm sure a lot of people are really benefiting from it. Was there anything else you wanted to mention or point out or plug or anything like that? I think we're probably done. So
I think, thanks for having me. Thanks for the support also to the community. I mean, I'm getting nice feedback, and this is really the thing that keeps me going.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate making the time, and we can chat anytime and touch base on some of the things we left unclosed, I guess.
Untouched. Sure. And if any of the viewers or listeners, if you have any questions, just post them below. I will have a look over the comments from time to time and react to them.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, thanks so much, Chris, and we'll talk soon for sure.
Have a good day.
Have a good night. Okay, bye.
Bye, Adam.
All right, thanks for joining me for another episode of Beyond the Reef with Christoph Denk from Oceamo Labs. Make sure you check out their website at oceamo.com. If you're really looking to fine-tune your reef or problem solve, or you just are curious about getting a laboratory test, I would say this is an excellent resource for the hobby. And as per usual, if you have any suggestions for future guests, want to just ask us a question, make a suggestion, make a criticism, whatever you want to say, feel free to reach out at beyondthereefpod@gmail.com. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave us a review. And if you're looking for high-quality aquacultured corals in Canada, please check us out at fraggarage.ca. Hope to hear from you soon.